the police were stumped.
Sandee had no enemies. Everybody loved her.
But it wasn't long before her boyfriend identified a suspect.
Well, I was asking him questions about who would want to harm Sandra. It was almost like a light bulb went off in his head.
Tracy Humphrey was a bodybuilder with a shady past.
Looking at his history, going from police reports and criminal history, he seemed to have a pattern of violence.
He was also due to face Sandra in court on a serious assault charge in less than a month.
He was looking at 10 years in prison.
But he had an airtight alibi for the night of the shooting.
He was 30, 40 miles away at the time of the homicide.
So if not Tracy Humphrey, then who? The mystery would lead to the unlikeliest of suspects.
Do you understand what you're being arrested for?
They said the murder of a woman that I don't know.
A bright young woman with a tragic past and a bodybuilder with a history of violence. The key question was, who pulled the trigger? In the autumn of 2001, 36-year-old Sandra Rozzo was working in the VIP bar of the Inferno, a Tampa nightclub. It was the perfect job for the vivacious fitness fanatic.
She was super duper nice, you know, she was very friendly.
She just had such a big heart. And if she thought she could help you in any way, she would do her best to try to help you.
Sandra struck up a friendship with a muscular bouncer who was new to the club. 35-year-old Timothy Humphrey was known as Tracy to his friends.
When I first met Tracy, well, the first thing I thought was, God, what a good-looking man. Very nice, very soft-spoken, charming, funny, you know. He was very intimidating.
Not only was Tracy intimidating, but according to what he told his friends, he also had an impressive background.
He said he modeled for Hugo Boss. You know, he played football for the Bucks.
As he was new to the Inferno, Sandra offered to help him meet some people and find his bearings.
She was trying to help him meet new people, make new friends.
But Tracy misunderstood her friendliness and generosity, and before long, he was asking her out.
You know, and he just didn't want to take no for an answer.
On the evening of the 22nd of February 2002, 4 months after they'd met, Sandra alleged that Tracy crossed the line. According to what Sandra told the police, after giving her a ride home from work, Tracy invited himself in. He then assaulted her.
She alleged he raped her and beat her up. He would not let her leave, wouldn't let her go to work, wouldn't let her see her friends.
Finally, Sandra convinced him to let her go.
She had plans to fly up to Pennsylvania, so he drove her to the airport. When he dropped her off at the airport, she called a friend to say what happened, and that friend, you know, helped her contact law enforcement.
Tracy was arrested and charged with assault. But Sandra Rozzo would never get her day in court. There was a lot more to Tracy than she or anyone else had realized.
Due to his past record, he was looking at an enhancement as a habitual offender and looking at 10 years in prison.
Tracy Humphrey had been in prison before, and he was determined never to go back.
He would tell people that he'd die before he'd go back to prison again.
As Tracy's court date approached, he left the Inferno and began working at a gym in the Tampa commuter town of Brandon. There, in September 2002, he met 19-year-old Ashley Laney, who came in one day looking to sign up for a trial membership.
I was the fitness director, and I used to help with sales, so they asked me to come in and talk to her and tell her about the gym and tell her about what I would do for her to help her. So I did, and we kind of immediately developed a rapport. Ashley
had troubles of her own. Her father was in jail for sexual battery by the time she was born in 1982. And because her mother had problems with substance abuse, Ashley had been brought up mainly by her grandmother. Growing up in Brandon, Ashley was a bright child who had managed to stay out of trouble.
Her father was in prison. Her mother was an alcoholic. However, with Ashley herself, she was a very good student in school.
But when her grandmother died during Ashley's final year at high school, things started to fall apart. She still managed to graduate with honours, but dropped out of university in her first year. She took a job in a cafe in a local shopping centre across the road from the gym where Tracy Humphrey worked.
She went in there and, they started talking and they became friends.
The two hit it off, but Tracy wasn't entirely honest with Ashley. He had lied about his past to other friends, and he told the same lies to Ashley.
Here's a guy who, basically would tell all these lies that he had been a star player in the Rose Bowl, that he had once played for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, that he modeled underwear in Italy. He had all these grand stories.
After a few training sessions, the 35-year-old weightlifter asked the teenager out to dinner.
Even though he was very overpowering in his physical image and intimidating that way, he talked very sensitive and just made you believe that he was a very soft, gentle person.
Soon they were seeing each other regularly.
She was a real good friend with benefits, but she didn't push me like everybody else was. They wanted exclusivity, and she did too, but she didn't push it.
We became kind of sex buddies. He was dating other women, and I was dating other guys, but I was monogamous in the bed with him.
She was young and impressionable. She absolutely adored him, and she would and did do anything for him that he wanted her to do.
But Ashley had no idea that her new lover had been in and out of prison for the last 15 years.
He was from Iowa, and he got involved in criminal activity when he moved here to Florida. And he was in and out, trouble with the law, had done some time in state prison.
A significant portion of his prior record was violence aimed at women.
And Ashley also didn't know that Tracy was still facing charges relating to the alleged rape of Sandra Rozzo. By early 2003, Ashley Laney had left her job at the cafe and was working with Tracy Humphrey at the gym. Still unaware of Humphrey's past, Ashley began dating him exclusively. She confided to her hairdresser that she was happier than ever.
She did tell me that she felt like she finally found someone who understood her. And this whole time I was thinking, poor thing.
In March, Ashley moved in with Tracy.
It was at that point that I felt the need to give her a heads up, if you will, about the situation with Sandee. And just about me, I didn't want that sneaking up on me. So I just came clean.
Tracy claimed he was completely innocent and that Sandra had made the whole thing up to get back at him for seeing other women.
He told her these things, and she bought it hook, line, and sinker.
According to Ashley, Tracy also told her he would do anything to avoid going back to jail.
Tracy really pounded into her head that they couldn't be together anymore if he was sent to prison, and that he would do anything. They even talked about a suicide pact at one time. He talked about going on the lam.
Tracy always said how he would commit suicide before he go to prison. He's like, I am never going to prison again.
In the summer of 2003, after a fight over an alleged affair Tracy was having at work, Ashley left and went to her mother's house. Tracy followed her there.
So I went home, I started telling her everything. When I'm in the middle of the story, Tracy pulls up to the house. And my mom was like, please don't go out there, please don't go out there, I'm gonna call the police.
But the police were never called, and Tracy and Ashley were reconciled.
He said, I promise you won't have to do this, just come back, we'll work something out. I can't live without you.
I came to realize, I don't think I'm gonna find this again, or do I want to keep looking when I have this wonderful girl? So I jumped in. I asked her to marry me.
Instead of an engagement ring, the couple opted for something more permanent.
I had just gotten his tattoo, his name on my back, and he had gotten my name on his back.
On the 4th of July, less than a year after they met, Tracy Humphrey and Ashley Laney were married at the gym.
He said, when do you want your wedding date to be? And I said, well, how about July 4th? You know, it'd be cool to have fireworks on our anniversary. So we had our papers notarized, and that was the extent of our wedding. We were both training clients, and we were having our papers notarized. And that night, we went out to dinner at the Cheesecake Factory.
The newlyweds' dinner the following night was even more modest, a takeaway pizza. But as the police would soon discover, that dinner would turn out to be far more significant. At 10:30 p.m. on the 5th of July, Sandra Rozzo ended her shift at the Green Iguana, where she'd gone to work after leaving the Inferno. She got into her BMW and headed for her apartment in Pinellas Park, Florida, about half an hour's drive away. Her boyfriend, Tony Ponicall, was at home waiting for her.
He had gone to bed early. He said he heard something like fireworks. He didn't think anything about it. And then after a while, he thought, well, Stan should have been home. Where is she?
Tony went downstairs to look for Sandra at about 11:15 p.m. When he opened the door to the garage, he saw that her car was in it. But something was horribly wrong.
He ran over to the car, and she was slumped over the seat. And he wasn't sure exactly because he was so upset. He didn't know what it was. And he picked up her cell phone, he called 911.
When I first got there, I was briefed by the patrol sergeant who was working. He and the officers that were there said there was a shooting.
He would soon discover that it was not just a shooting, it was murder. The police would quickly identify a suspect. The only problem, he had an airtight alibi.
The first shock that I got was when the pizza guy told me he did deliver the pizza there. He did deal with a person whose physical description matched Tracy Humphrey.
Just after 11 p.m. on the 5th of July 2003, the police and paramedics were called to an apartment in Pinellas Park, Florida. Inside the garage, they found 37-year-old Sandra Rozzo slumped in the driver's seat of her BMW.
The driver's side window was smashed, and then inside the vehicle, especially on the passenger side seat and floorboard, there was a lot of blood, and then also on the driver's seat up toward the top, there was also good amounts of blood.
By the time Detective Golzewski arrived at the scene, Sandra had already been rushed to hospital. At 12:04 a.m., she was officially pronounced dead.
She was shot in the head, which would have been a fatal wound, and she had 3 other bullet wounds to her upper torso. There was 1 shot in her foot, and I believe 1 or 2 in her leg.
She was so shot up, we had to have a closed casket. She would not have wanted anybody to see her like that.
Sandra had been shot 8 times. The police secured the crime scene and began collecting evidence.
We did recover multiple shell casings. There was some blood at the scene. Initially, we didn't know what that was, who that was going to lead to, but the shell casings would probably...
The shells had been fired from a .22 caliber weapon, probably a pistol.
It was a .22 caliber gun. It was a semi-automatic, which would have ejected the shell casings.
The obvious question was, who wanted Sandra Rozzo dead?
You'd have to be pretty cold-hearted to walk up to someone, not only shoot him 1 time, but shoot him 8 times.
As soon as we can, we start interviewing people who know our victim, and that usually will lead us in a direction of potential suspects.
As crime technicians continued to work the scene, detectives sat down with Sandra's distraught boyfriend.
He and I sat down at his table, and it was almost like a light bulb went off in his head when I was asking him questions about who would want to harm Sandra.
Family members also told the detective about Sandra's upcoming court date with Tracy Humphrey. The trial was set to begin on the 4th of August, almost exactly a month from the day of the murder.
And I told him about the incident that happened and that Sandee had been threatened, that he threatened to kill her and all of her family.
That was the person, if anyone wanted to harm Sandra, it would be him.
The next morning, the police began a background check on Tracy Humphrey.
We subpoena a lot of records in a case like this when we have suspects who are, I would say, lack of a better term, this viable, that appear to have some connection, credit records, bank records, cell phone records.
They confirmed that not only had Tracy been arrested for the battery of Sandra Rozzo, he had also served time in jail for similar charges against other women.
Looking at his history, going from police reports and criminal history, he seemed to have a pattern of violence.
He was looking at a felony crime, and he was looking at a potential prison sentence as a result of that. Because of the prior criminal conduct there, we decided to take a look at his possible involvement.
On Monday, the 7th of July, the police made the 40-mile drive from Pinellas Park to Brandon.
We went over to Hillsborough County, where Tracy Humphrey was living, and knocked on the door, left a card on the door, and asked that Tracy Humphrey call me in reference to a case I was working.
Tracy called back and left a message offering to meet them later at the gym. But when the detectives arrived, Tracy refused to talk.
He told me that he had an attorney for the battery case, and the attorney advised him not to talk to anyone about Miss Rozzo's death.
During the course of their investigation, the police also discovered that Tracy had recently got married.
We learned that he had been married the day before the homicide to Ashley. And so we proceeded to try and interview Ashley, who was at home that same day that they had tried to talk to Tracy.
We asked her about the weekend in question. She told us she had gotten married on July 4th, which was the day before the homicide. I asked her if she went on a honeymoon, if they were out of town, did they do anything, and she told me they basically stayed local and went to a beach.
Then the detectives asked her about the following night, the night that Sandra Rozzo was gunned down in her garage.
We were able to get statements from her that they were home that night, that had ordered pizza, they had a friend over.
Her friend, Toby White, was over, and she gave me a phone number and a cell phone and a home number to reach Toby White.
But halfway through the interview, Tracy came home and abruptly ended the questioning.
He was so mad his head was purple. I mean, red and purple. That's how upset he was. And, he just didn't want her talking to us at all. So that was about all I got from that interview.
It wasn't much, but as Detective Golzewski left the couple's apartment, he got the sense that he was onto something.
I knew she had knowledge of something that had happened. Now it's all about building the case around like a thought and a suspicion. So the first thing I did was try to destroy their alibis.
But the first alibi was confirmed. The pizza shop had a credit card receipt from Tracy Humphrey from about the time of the murder. And the delivery man was able to identify him from a photo.
Now I'm thinking, how could he have committed a homicide if we've got a pizza guy who's going to say he was, 30, 40 miles away at the time of the homicide?
Next, the police contacted Toby White to get her to confirm Tracy's other alibi.
They initially called me and stated that they were under the impression that I was with Tracy the night of the murder, and that they would need to talk to me about that.
Toby agreed to meet them the next day.
When I went in to train that night, Tracy said, no, you're not going to talk to them without a lawyer present. And I called them back and said that I could not talk to them without the lawyer, and therefore they said, well, we'll have to do an actual deposition then instead of just an interview.
Toby White gave her statement a few weeks later.
I told them I went over to Tracy's at about 8:30 and was over there until about 12:30 or 1 in the morning.
She was able to confirm that she was at the house and they were both there.
With both alibis confirmed, the police were at a dead end. If Tracy Humphrey hadn't killed Sandra Rozzo, who had?
At that point, we didn't know what to think. Sandee had no enemies. Everybody loved her.
There was nobody else that we knew that really would want her deceased, although we looked at pretty much anybody she knew and tried to establish that information.
We followed up on all different leads. Basically could find nobody that wanted her dead, and her family kept bringing up his name.
The police were convinced they were on the right track, but they would have to find another way to prove it. The investigation would soon reveal a secret relationship.
I asked him, does she know about us? And he said no.
And undercover surveillance would record a shocking revelation.
I don't even remember if I said she was back there when the pizza was delivered or not.
She wasn't.
In September 2003, Florida police were investigating the murder of 37-year-old Sandra Rozzo. Their chief suspect was bodybuilder Tracy Humphrey, whom Sandra had accused of a serious sexual assault the year before. But Tracy had an alibi. He'd been at home eating a takeaway pizza. And one of his clients, Toby White, said she'd been with Tracy and his wife Ashley that night.
We knew at that time that he could not have been the person who had pulled the trigger, but we felt that he still had an interest or a desire in wanting to see her dead.
Despite Tracy's apparently airtight alibis, the police were not convinced. Still suspicious, they subpoenaed Tracy and Ashley's mobile phone records. It was the breakthrough they were looking for. The phone record showed that Tracy Humphrey may have been at home at the time of the murder, but Ashley wasn't.
Tracy's cell phone was pinging off of the tower by his house, and Ashley's cell phone was pinging off the tower right by where Miss Rozzo worked, all the way up until the time Miss Rozzo came off duty. And we were able to determine the cell phone towers were getting closer and closer to Pinellas Park.
And then, just minutes after Sandra's murder, a tower less than a mile from her apartment picked up a call from Ashley's phone to Tracy's, 20 miles away.
The police were able to get cell phone tower records to sort of place Ashley at Sandee's home when the murder occurred.
But what about Toby White's statement that both Humphreys were at home all night? A few days after she gave her deposition, White contacted the police, saying she wanted to meet them again.
I proceeded to tell them what was going on, that I was lying, but I was terrified. I didn't know what I was going to do.
White told the police she knew nothing about Sandra's murder and that she hadn't been at their house that night as she'd claimed. She said Tracy had come to her the next day and asked her to provide him with an alibi.
He said, I really don't know what I'll have to do if you don't go along with this. I won't be left with a lot of options. It scared me half to death.
The police asked her if she'd be willing to wear a wire and tape conversations between Tracy and Ashley. She agreed to do so.
Cell phone records indicated that she was in Pinellas County at the time of the killing.
That was the one thing that I hope wasn't true.
It showed like 2 or 3 times it was bouncing off Pinellas towers, and one of them was right about when she was killed.
Oh my God.
The police also spoke to David Abernathy, Ashley's mother's boyfriend, who told them that Ashley had borrowed a gun from him a few weeks before the murder, claiming she needed it for protection. She had not returned it. The gun was a semi-automatic .22 caliber Ruger pistol.
He actually loaned her a gun that was the same caliber and same type of strike that our shell casings had.
By December, with mobile phone records, the surveillance tape and the gun, the police felt they had enough evidence to arrest Ashley Humphrey. But they still believed Tracy was behind the murder.
We knew we had to arrest both of them. He, to me, was a flight risk. He would have left Ashley on a dime and gotten out of there had we arrested her for the homicide.
And from the surveillance footage, the police were aware that Tracy knew that the net was closing in on Ashley. Investigators had to move fast. Going through Tracy's credit card records, the police found a charge from a local shooting range.
I was able to talk with the people that work at the shooting range who were able to inform me Tracy Humphrey was handling the gun, was showing Ashley how to load it.
Handling a gun was a violation of Tracy's parole.
Timothy Humphrey was a convicted felon. We had that he had been at a gun range handling ammunition and handling a firearm.
Investigators still didn't have enough evidence to charge Tracy Humphrey with murder, but they could take him into custody for a parole violation while they continued to build their case. On the 18th of December 2004, Ashley and Tracy Humphrey were at work.
I was cleaning the windows, and I remembered about 8 squad cars pulled up into the driveway, and I could see them all in the reflection of the glass door that I was cleaning. And I was like, oh my God.
The police approached Ashley first.
And they're like, is your husband here? And I said, yes, he is. And I'm like, okay, he's getting arrested. So it still hasn't hit me that I'm getting arrested too.
Tracy and Ashley Humphrey were handcuffed and taken to the police station. When investigators sat Ashley down in an interrogation room, she refused to talk.
Do you understand what you're being arrested for?
They said the murder of a woman that I don't know. So
Okay.
it's just a little frightening to know that I'm being arrested for.
Okay. Well,
So I want my attorney.
you are going to be extradited back over to Pinellas County, and you'll have to answer to the charge of murder in the first degree.
Get my attorney.
What do you mean, get him?
I mean, bring him here.
For what reason?
I'm not speaking. I didn't do this. I'm not speaking without my attorney.
I think 23 times she said, I want my lawyer, I want my lawyer. I jokingly said to my co-counsel, this should be the tape we show all of our clients in how to handle a police interrogation. I don't know if I've ever seen a client handle a police interrogation as well as she did.
For the next several hours, Ashley refused to speak to investigators. That evening, she was read her rights and transported to the Pinellas County Jail.
So they finally booked me, and it was like, okay, I'll just gotta make it through till Monday when I can get out.
When Ashley finally saw her lawyer on Monday morning, the reality of her situation still hadn't sunk in. Her lawyer, however, knew how serious it was.
This is a capital felony. Upon conviction as charged, there's only 2 possibilities. There's life without parole and there's death. And either way, you die in prison.
She also knew that the state wanted to connect Tracy Humphrey to the murder, but didn't yet have enough evidence. She thought prosecutors might be willing to make a deal in Ashley's case. But first, she'd have to convince Ashley to betray her husband.
You don't fall out of love with somebody the minute you're in jail. She loved him. She loved him. And he was the most important person in her life.
But Ashley was about to find out that nearly everything Tracy Humphrey had told her since they met was a lie. In February, Ashley's lawyers came to her with information that made her begin to realize who her husband really was.
They finally were just like, do you know that he's lied to you? He was never a football player. And do you know that he was never a model for Armani?
They also told Ashley that a number of Tracy's former girlfriends had accused him of abuse and violence.
You have this manipulative schemer who lies about his background, who has just got a terrible history of treating women.
But it was Tracy's alleged affairs with men that finally broke her. According to a sworn statement from Ashley's hairdresser, her husband was bisexual.
The deposition they showed me was his extracurricular activities with men. Do you know that, he's been bisexual and your hairdresser is his gay lover?
Ashley had had no idea. Hector said he'd been sworn to secrecy by Tracy.
I asked him, does she know about us? And he said no. And he goes, and I don't want her to know. I said, okay. You know, so I knew by the way she acted that she had no idea. She just thought I was a gay friend of his, that we were really close friends.
My brainwashing started coming down. You know, they opened my eyes. My attorneys opened my eyes.
Ashley finally agreed to let her lawyers approach the state with an offer to testify against her husband in return for a reduced sentence.
We sat down with the decision makers in the state attorney's office, which is a very nerve-wracking event for a defense attorney because you've now told them that your client's guilty of homicide.
We all decided uniformly that we wanted to find out what she had to say.
When Ashley finally sat down with them on the 2nd of March, what she had to say would shock them all. The terrible truth would finally emerge about the murder of Sandra Rozzo.
He told me that she would have a different look when, you know, like her soul was gone.
On the 2nd of March 2004, after refusing to talk for 3 months, Ashley Humphrey met the state prosecutors. She'd agreed to testify against her husband in return for a reduced sentence for the murder of Sandra Rozzo. But first, they wanted to hear what she had to say. Ashley told prosecutors that her husband, Tracy, had been the mastermind of the plot to kill Sandra Rozzo. On the night of the murder, the plan was for Ashley to ambush Sandra when she left work at the Green Iguana.
I had brown contacts, I had black face paint, my hair was secured in a bun and hidden under a hat. At a quick glance, I looked like a skinny black man.
After sitting in the car park for hours, waiting for Sandra to come out, she finally got her chance.
So I was like, well, she's getting in her car. So I turned my car on, I followed her out of the parking lot, I started following her. I called Tracy, I told him that it was going to be over in a few minutes.
Ashley followed Sandra all the way home, keeping in constant contact with Tracy on her mobile phone, just as the records had indicated. When Sandra pulled into her garage, Ashley knew she had a choice to make.
I was like, well, if I don't do this, he's going to be very mad.
The lawyers and detectives sat in stunned silence as she calmly described what happened next.
It was surreal. It was like I was in a dream. So I turned on the safety and I shot at the window and I could hear her screaming. And I started shooting her, and I remembered that he had drilled into my head, you have to aim for, you know, a vital organ or something, because the bullets are so small that it's not going to kill her, and we don't want her talking on the hospital bed.
She was shot in the foot, she was shot in the head and torso and other parts of her body. Ashley shoots, gets back in the car, and drives away from the scene, and then contacts Tracy by phone.
Then Ashley said something that took everyone by surprise.
All that was going through my head was his wrath if I didn't do it, because of the first time that I didn't do it, it was, you know, he was very mean.
Detectives were stunned when Ashley mentioned a first time. She told the officials gathered round the table that just over a month before she killed Sandra Rozzo, she'd made another failed attempt with a high-powered rifle equipped with a sight.
I was inside of my VW, and I had the rifle with a pair of jeans around the barrel so that nobody would really see it. When I saw her and went to aim at her, I thought that the barrel was on top of my side mirror, but it was actually right through the side mirror. I shot a bullet through it.
Sandra ducked when she heard the mirror explode, but never realized she was being shot at.
She was like looking around like, what in the hell? And while she's doing that, I'm trying to shoot at her again, but the gun had jammed.
I do recall a couple of times looking over at a couple of the law enforcement officers that were present for the interrogation. At one point, one of them kind of dropped his pencil like, geez, I can't even believe this.
Ashley explained to the detectives that almost from the moment they met, Tracy had been pushing her to take care of the Sandra Rozzo problem.
Every day he was like, you gotta work on it, you gotta work on it. You know, if you don't do this, you're gonna leave. I'm kicking you out.
He would prey on her weakness, which was she loved him. She wanted to spend her whole life with him.
After hearing Ashley's story and confirming that she was telling the truth, prosecutors agreed to reduce her sentence to 25 years if she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and testified against her husband.
But for Timothy Humphrey, Sandra Rozzo would be alive today. Ashley did the killing, however, she did the killing at his request, at his urging, and therefore we wanted to make sure that he was held responsible for this act too.
I wanted him. He's the one. If it wouldn't have been for him, this would not have happened.
On the 20th of March 2004, Tracy Humphrey, who was being held without bail for the weapons charge, was informed that he had been indicted for first-degree murder.
I was upset, I was angry, and then it was just always counting on the fact that, well, I'm innocent. I'm innocent. And I got that.
His trial began on the 14th of February 2006, Valentine's Day. On the 20th of February, Ashley took the stand to testify against him. It was the first time she had seen her husband since their arrest, more than 2 years earlier.
He shrank. He wasn't on steroids anymore. He had changed so much that it was just a shock to see him. I think I weighed more than him by the time we got to trial. I had gotten fat and he had gotten very skinny.
Ashley began by calmly explaining to the jury the events leading up to Sandra Rozzo's murder.
The courtroom was completely silent. I think everybody was zoned in on exactly what she had to say.
The most dramatic moments came when she talked through the details of the murder.
Shot her repeatedly till I thought she was dead, and I looked in her eyes and she was dead.
You hear about this stuff on TV, but it just adds a whole different element when someone is sitting face to face with you and basically explaining how they were able to do something like this.
But it was perhaps the final detail that had the greatest effect on the courtroom.
When it was done, she described in pretty good detail how she leaned into the vehicle to check to see that Sandra was actually dead.
He had coached me to look into her eyes and make sure she was dead, not to leave before she was dead. And he told me that she would have a different look when, you know, like her soul was gone. So I do remember looking her in the eyes, and I will never get that memory out of my mind.
3 days later, after the prosecution had backed up Ashley's story with physical evidence, Tracy Humphrey took the stand. He claimed that the murder had been Ashley's idea and that he'd had nothing to do with it.
The first thing that she said was, what if she doesn't come to court? And I said that I kind of hope that's what happens. And then she said, well, what if somebody kept her from coming to court? And that was the first time that I said to her, don't ever even joke like that. That's not funny.
On the following day, Friday the 24th of February 2006, the jury retired to consider its verdict.
I felt pretty confident about it, but you still get the butterflies, you still worry, no matter what, with the jury system.
Later that day, the jury announced it had come to a decision. The jurors had deliberated for just over 2 hours.
The verdict, it was unanimous. Everybody thought that he was guilty.
I will sentence you to the Department of Corrections for the rest of your natural life. You have no possibility of parole.
He didn't have much of a reaction at all that I recall. He just pretty much sat there stone-faced. Couldn't really read any emotion on his face, no shock or anything like that.
Ashley was told the verdict in a holding cell at the Pinellas County Jail.
My attorney came 11 minutes after the verdict was announced, and she had tears in her eyes, and she said, they found him guilty, you know, and she was very happy for me, and we both cried.
2 weeks later, Ashley was sentenced to 25 years in prison, as agreed in the deal she had made with the state. For those who were close to the case, it was impossible to escape the feeling that the murder of Sandra Rozzo was a double tragedy.
As far as I'm concerned, that day he took 2 lives. He took my daughter's and he took Ashley's. She was a good girl. She had never gotten any trouble before, didn't even have a speeding ticket. How could she let herself be talked into doing something like this? No man is worth that.
I don't believe that she would have been a criminal or had any kind of criminal record if she hadn't met up with him. And even if she had met up with him and hadn't had such a horrible childhood, then this probably wouldn't have happened. It was just a recipe for disaster.
As for Ashley, she'll have to live the rest of her life knowing that what she did that July night can never be undone.
I wish I could take it all back. I wish I had never met Tracy, and I'm very sorry.